subconscious that we learned, but we don't really remember ever learning it. But we must have learned it at some time, or we've learned it so well that we do it automatically where we don't think about it. We learn that with the right side of our brain, implicitly, subconsciously, non-declaratively. So what are some things that we may learn with the right brain? And the right brain learns a lot. As a matter of fact, remember I said that the right brain learns in the first 2 to 3 years of life, or that's when the right brain is developing. Now, we also go in that period from 25% to 90% of our adult brain. So we have the most massive growth spurt in our whole life during that period. But we also have something called childhood amnesia, which means none of you really remember before the age of 3. Why is that? Well, because you don't have a left brain yet. And without your left brain, you can't form conscious memories. But you are forming memories that actually form the foundation of all of your relationships and emotions and all of your interactions socially for the rest of your life. That in those first 2 to 3 years is when you learn nonverbal communication. You learn first how to recognize emotions on yourself. You first feel your own muscles as they smile or as they frown, and you start to recognize that this feels good or bad, and that is either happy or sad. And then you start to be able to actually read that. You first do it by mimicking your mother, or your mother actually triggers that as a reflex in you, and then you start to actually read her facial expressions and be in tune with her emotions and recreate them in your own body. And then you learn how to do it with other people in your family, and then other children, and then other kids on the playground. And that's how you learn the rules of social engagement. The left hemisphere wants to be social, but the right hemisphere learns how to be social. How to do that by reading nonverbal communication, facial expression, eye contact, tone of voice, body posture, and the timing of actions and speech. That's what the right hemisphere controls, and that's how we communicate first and early on, and that's how we learn to read other people. And then we develop an area on the right side of our brain that connects to our body, that feels our body, that feels our emotions, that when we're sick to our stomach because we're worried, we feel it in the right side of our brain. And then when we see others, we're able to actually mimic their movements and their facial expression and their eye movements and their tone of voice, and we literally mimic it with us doing it virtually in our brain. And then we say, I know what that person's feeling, I know what they're thinking, because when I do that with my body, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm thinking. And this is called empathy. And we develop that with the right side of the brain. And we develop that, mostly the foundation of it, in the first 2 to 3 years. Now, children with autism or Asperger's or ADHD to a degree, they all have social problems. They all have problems with nonverbal communication. And they don't learn how to socialize, which means that it's not genetically programmed. But if I said to any of you, when did you learn how to read social cues? When did you learn how to read emotions on other people? When did you become aware of the difference between what it feels like to be happy or sad? You would say, I don't know. It just is. That's because that's the way the right brain learns. It just is. We're able to, we don't know how we learned it, but we know that we learn it because when we have a deficit in the right brain, we don't learn it. And so what we see is we have children that have social problems, nonverbal communication problems. And the problem is, if we go back and try to teach them the rules, we try to teach them how to socialize. We say, okay, this is how you socialize. This is when you do that. We're doing it consciously, which means we're doing it to the left side of the brain, which doesn't learn socially that way. So the only way we can actually get social skills to come out naturally is to get them to emerge naturally by connecting their body to the right brain. How do we do that? Well, part of it is by getting them to be more coordinated, to work on these big muscles, to let them know where their body is in space so they're not so clumsy and uncoordinated, so that they feel more connected to their body. And when they do, they then feel more connected to their emotions. Because the right side of the brain is connected and it gets this gut feeling, it also has a lot to do with controlling the gut and the digestive system. The left side of the brain and the right side control behavior differently. So we have two basic platforms of human behavior, what we call approach and avoidance, meaning do we move towards something or we move away. And all of our behaviors are really a product of those. So we either move towards something, and the left brain wants to do that. The left brain is motor driven. It wants to act. It wants to move. It's intentional. It wants to go out into the world. It's impulsive. It's hyperactive by nature. It wants to go out. It wants to touch everything and look at everything and analyze every little detail in the environment. And it wants to line it up all in a sequence and figure out where that's going to go and then memorize it and figure out the pattern and then do it over and over and over again. It wants to move its body in a pattern or in a type of movement, what we call a stereotyped movement. And it wants to do it over and over and over again. It just feels like doing it. And normally the right brain controls what we call withdrawal behavior. So it stops us from doing things. It inhibits us from doing things. So normally the left brain wants to go out and wants to touch everything and feel everything and do everything. It's got a word it wants to say, a sound it wants to make, an action it wants to do, a thought or a behavior it wants to do over and over and over again. You know, it gets an idea, I need to wash my hands. And it goes and washes the hands. And then it goes, I need to wash them again. I need to wash them again. I need to wash them again. And then the right brain goes, okay, stop already. You washed them. They're clean. Move on. I'm getting bored here. Let's move on to the next thing. The left hemisphere says, you know, I want to jump up and down in that chair and scream. And I want to just go over there and do it. And the right brain goes, don't do that. That's socially inappropriate. You might hurt yourself. You might hurt somebody else. You might hurt someone's feelings. Don't do that. Don't say that. It's not right. You're going to look stupid if you do that. And the right hemisphere, so it's kind of like a bouncer. It's kind of like a mother. And it also avoids danger. So these different behavioral platforms, why do we act one way or the other? Well, because we have different motivations. What motivates us? Emotions. So the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere have different emotions that they control and perceive. The left hemisphere, we have what we call positive emotions, and the right hemisphere are negative or inhibitory emotions. And there's only actually 6 basic human emotions. 3 of them are positive and left brain, 3 of them are negative and right brain. And by negative or positive, we're really talking about, you know, proactive or inhibitory. So the 3 basic positive emotions are happy, anger, happiness, anger, and surprise. The 3 basic negative emotions are sadness, fear, and disgust. And so we have different emotions. So if we have a high right brain and a low left brain, we're going to be more negative. We're going to be more anxious. We're going to be more depressed, which is what depression is. If we have a high left brain and a low right brain, we're going to have unusually high emotions. We're going to be manic, or we're going to be, really kind of crazy, or maybe really angered all the time. So what we see is that we control the emotions differently. It controls behavior. It controls our movement differently, our muscles differently. It controls the way we process sensory information. The left hemisphere processes detailed information. Most children don't really have a sensory processing deficit. They have a sensory processing imbalance. Children, like, for instance, with autism, will, actually be hypersensitive to high-frequency, high-pitched sounds because their left brain is very high. And that left brain processes high-pitched, high-frequency, rapid sounds. The right hemisphere processes low-frequency sounds, like with emotion or tone of voice. So they don't hear tone of voice because they don't process auditory sounds with the right brain very well. Same thing visually. An autistic child will walk in this room and look at a little speck on the floor and analyze it and look at it and get stuck in the details, but not be able to see the big picture around them or read facial expression or emotion. It also controls our immune system this way, so that it activates the immune system with the left hemisphere and inhibits the immune system with the right. So if we have an imbalance in the brain, we get an imbalance in the immune system. If we have a right hemisphere deficit, we get an immune system that's overactive. So we get a lot of food sensitivities and chemical sensitivities and environmental sensitivities, or we get autoimmunity like eczema or asthma or allergies. On the other hand, if we have a low left brain and a high right brain, we have a weak immune system. These children who can't read and who have problems with language skills They also have a lot of ear infections when they're kids. They get chronically ill. They have antibiotics. They never get sick. They always have boogers running out of their nose. They always breathe through their mouth. And they've been on antibiotics over and over again. And they get tubes placed in their ears because they have a weak immune system. This also works differently with boys and girls or men and women. So let me use an example, and this is how you're really going to understand that I know what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to answer a question that you've always had, all right? So ladies, first of all, when we look at the way the brains are built, women have very symmetrical brains. They have a bigger bridge, naturally, between the two sides of the brain. So women have more fluid and naturally more coordinated brains, so women can generally multitask better than men. They can do a lot of things at the same time. Ladies, hold on to your chairs, because this is going to shock you. But men are more single-minded. You didn't know that, right? When we're really concentrating hard, we can really only use one side of our brain at a time really well. And our right brain is larger than our left. We have lopsided brains, where the right frontal lobe is larger, which is typically where it's smaller in most kids with ADHD and autism. And remember, the right side of the brain is spatial. It's nonverbal. It's intuitive. So, let me know if you've ever experienced this, ladies. You're driving along with your man, and there's a point where you go, you're lost, right? You don't know where the hell you are right now. And he doesn't answer you. And you don't know, and you say to yourself, what the heck is he thinking right now? Well, you know he's lost. And so you say to him, you see that guy in the gas station? He looks like he knows. Pull over there and talk to him and ask that guy. And we don't pull over and we don't answer you. And you're saying, what is he thinking? So let me answer that for you. What he's actually saying to you is he's saying, honey, I'm a male. And I'm single-minded, and I'm intuitive, and I'm spatial, and I'm nonverbal. So I have to just get a gut feeling as to where I need to go, spatially. And I can't use both sides of the brain at the same time, so I can't go and talk to that guy and ask him for directions while I'm trying to figure out where I'm going, because I wouldn't be able to do that at the same time. I can't explain this to you either, because then I would have to use both sides of my brain at the same time, and I can't do that right now. So I'm just going to figure this out intuitively without speaking to you, and maybe I might non-verbally communicate to you, like I might at a certain point go, ugh! Or I might like hit the dashboard, ah, like that. And I'm saying to you, honey, just let my right male brain figure this out, and I'll be okay. Okay? So that's the way that works together. So now I know that you've always had that question, and now you can go home and answer it, and now when you go on long drives, it won't be so upsetting. You'll understand neurology and brain function. So all of this stuff works together. And we see that, you know, this is the imbalance between these two. When we have certain skills that are too good and certain skills that are too little, this is what adds up to what we label as a disorder. So when we have a right hemisphere delay, developmental delay or underactivation, this is what we usually call Asperger's, autism, ADHD, OCD, PDD, oppositional defiant disorder. And what we can see is any combination of these things. They may have poor or clumsy gross motor movements. They're awkward. They don't have good balance. They may have low muscle tone in general. They may be delayed in some of their milestones. They don't roll over equally when they're supposed to. They don't crawl the way that they're supposed to. They may not walk on time. Their gross motor development may be delayed. They may have poor attention because the right brain is sensory and it pays attention to everything around it, the world around it. So they have attentional problems. They're impulsive and hyperactive because the left brain is naturally impulsive and hyperactive, and they can't stop it once we initiate that impulse. They also, because the right brain is connected to our body and our sense of self, they don't have good self-awareness. They're not really aware that they don't socialize appropriately or that they're not aware of other people's emotions. They have poor spatial orientation, so they bang into things, they're kind of clumsy and awkward. They don't have good nonverbal communication. They don't look in the eyes. They don't read eye contact or facial expression or tone of voice. And because of that, it affects their social behavior. They want to be social, but they don't know how to be social. So they do a lot of inappropriate things. They may be emotionally reactive, which means they go from, it looks like they have no emotion, to they going absolutely flipping out or having a meltdown, and then back down maybe to no emotion at all, because they're not really in touch with their emotions. These children may look anxious. They may be labeled. Doctors may even say, well, they have anxiety. They're not really anxious. They're actually a little bit manic because their left brain is hyperactive and impulsive. They love to do patterns and they love familiarity with the left brain, so they start something and they want to do it over and over and over again. They have a thought. They perseverate on a certain thought or an idea or a word. Or they're compulsive, that they start an action and they want to do it over. They start a movement and they want to continue that movement over and over and over again. In school, what we see is that they may have problems with the big picture skills. So they may be good at early word reading. They may be good at early math operations, but they have problems with reading comprehension or the main idea. They're really good with the literal meaning of the word and looking at these sequences and decoding the word, but when they have to put it all together, or look at the pragmatics, or humor, or metaphors, or inferences, or alternate meaning of words, they don't get that, because that's the right brain. And because of that, even though they may start out as good early word readers, they don't like to read books later on, or like chapter books. They may love to read books about facts and details, like trains or rocks or geology or dinosaurs, but they don't like Harry Potter books. They don't like books or stories because they don't get it. They don't get emotionally connected with it. They don't get, you know, what the characters are feeling, which is what really connects most people to it. Same thing with math. They may be good. They can calculate things in their head, or they're really good with remembering numbers, but they can't do word problems or spatial math or geometry. Their math reasoning skills are deficient later on. And they may have an overactive immune system, so they have chronic food sensitivities, or they have gluten problems, or casein problems, or soy problems, or they have other allergies, or they have eczema, or they have autoimmune system. Their immune system is too strong. The child with the left hemisphere under activation, this is dyslexia, processing disorders, language disorders, learning disabilities. They have fine motor problems, so they have problems with moving their fingers and handwriting. They have what's called dyspraxia quite often. They have reading problems. They can't decode. They're terrible with the syllables or phonics because their brain isn't processing sounds quickly enough with the left brain. So they're missing syllables. They're missing different sounds. And because of that, they can't figure out what the words are. And they're not able to match the symbol with the sound as it's coming out. What we see is that they may have delayed speech or articulation. They may speak with a lisp initially. They may be labeled as having poor auditory processing, which really means that they have a processing imbalance, because these children are very good at hearing low-frequency sounds. They're very good at listening to tone of voice or reading people's facial expressions. They're incredibly empathetic. They cry when another child is hurt, or when some other children make fun of the kid. They're usually very likable. They usually don't have behavioral problems early on. They have strictly academic problems. Later on, they may end up with behavioral problems because they're very socially aware. When they feel like they're being made to look stupid because they can't read out loud, or other kids make fun of them and say they're dumb, it kills them because they're so socially aware. They may even look like they have attentional problems, but they really don't. This child, a child who's labeled with ADHD and dyslexia, or a learning disability and ADHD, really isn't right. They usually have one or the other neurologically, but they can look like they have attentional problems. These children may be labeled with ADHD or ADD only, meaning attentional problems without impulsivity. But they're really not. What they are is they're spatial, so they want to be outside, they're looking out the window, they're kind of daydreamers. They're social, so they want to talk to their friends and have fun. They're emotional, so they can get really embarrassed very easily. They may be a little bit on the shy side, because they may be withdrawn. They hate doing the same thing over and over again, so they hate rote memorization. They hate details. They can't read what's in the border in their book, so they have trouble handwriting, so they avoid those things, and their avoidance can look like attentional problems. But these are the kids that, miraculously, where they may have problems when homework comes about, there's yelling, there's screaming, there's crying, but yet on the weekend they're great. They're the nicest kids in the world. In the summer, they're wonderful. They miraculously don't have any attentional problems because it's not an attentional problem. And one of the ways you can see this is that if you give a kid with a right brain deficit a stimulant medication like Ritalin, usually it makes their symptoms better. If you give a kid with a left brain deficit a stimulant, it usually doesn't make them better, and it might actually even make them worse, or it might make them impulsive and hyperactive where they weren't that way before, because they don't need that medication. And so if you give somebody who doesn't need a stimulant, you make them hyperactive, right? So that's one of the ways, if you've ever had medication prescribed